to make it clear.
Order. I did not make the comment.
Bill, it's not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight are my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. He's a life member of the Devonport Militia, speechwriter, tweeter and militant cyclist, David Slack, and he is the editor of independent news site livenews.co.nz, commentator and journalist Selwyn. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, 2 inquiries, 1 police investigation, spies meeting in Wellington, Key visiting Hollywood, and an official apology. How much more weird can the Kim.com scandal get? Issue 2, does the Education Ministry's handling of school closures in Christchurch make the GCSB illegal spying look competent? And issue 3, if crime is down, why are we building a new $1 billion private prison? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. .com is the gift that just keeps giving. There are now multiple inquiries, revelations that the Prime Minister knew months before he claimed to, reports of Echelon Nation spies meeting in Wellington days before Key gave .com his apology, and now a trip to Hollywood to meet the corporates behind the .com case, where Key assures us that .com won't be mentioned. First, a quick question to both of you. The breaking news this week that Key was briefed months before he told us he was. How damaging is that for the Prime Minister?
I just feel like saying dear, oh dear, oh dear, and just looping that for 30 minutes for this program. I mean, it's just astonishing, and I think it is bad for him, because it demonstrates to people that this man, who has been celebrated in other contexts for his encyclopedic knowledge of financial arcane instruments and the global trading setting of international markets and all kinds of things, where his recall is absolutely perfect, his detail and understanding and command of it is unimpeachable, and suddenly we're asked to believe that he can't remember this bit and this bit and this bit, and that, having been interviewed at length about the .com raid the day after, and referring to his residence status, he's then asking us to believe that by the time he gets to a briefing from the GCSB and they mention the fact that they worked together with police on the raid, he doesn't register that? I don't.
How damaging is this for
It's
John
extremely damaging from the point of view of the big questions around John Key now are: is he competent, or is he incompetent, relating to his governance of the security apparatus here? The other thing is like what David is alluding to. Let's take ourselves back to the time when John Key was told about the .com operations. That was immediately after one of the biggest news stories in New Zealand. Everybody in this country knew a huge FBI stimulated raid had occurred up there on John Key's electorate. For John Key to be in a meet and greet type briefing with the GCSB only a short time later, where it comes up on screen where .com's photo is. But beyond that, he is told by the GCSB, here with the .com operation is an illustration of how we can cooperate with the New Zealand police. And he doesn't remember now. I would have remembered, and I'm not the Prime Minister. And this is his patch. This is what he's in charge of.
Isn't the police investigating the GCSB for illegal spying they asked for a bit like John Banks investigating Kim.com's political donations? I mean, how much faith do we have in the police to be able to do this process?
The New Zealand public is astute. It shouldn't be played like a patsy or a fool. The New Zealand public interest is something that is very precious in this country, and a politician that goes against it does so at its peril. I would suggest that the questions around John Key are: is he competent? The questions around the New Zealand police's involvement in this whole affair is it incompetence or corruption? Now that's a totally different thing.
How is Rebecca Kittredge of the Department of the PM and Cabinet supposed to honestly investigate her old boss, Simon Murdoch, who ran the GCSB when this occurred? I mean, how much faith can we have in that process?
This is why most reasonably minded New Zealanders, who are represented by decent politicians, are kind of driving for an independent inquiry that looks at all of these matters. You cannot, on the police side, you cannot have the police investigating, for example, whether or not it committed perjury in the High Court. You cannot do that. It's not satisfactory. You cannot then have members that are involved in the governmental process investigating whether or not that process is satisfactory. The Prime Minister's already told us that it's going to be okay. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work.
The obvious person to do the inquiry is Jeffrey Palmer.
Sure.
Because he's
Well,
been...
I don't know about that, David.
Yeah.
From what I saw on Q&A, Jeffrey Palmer was taking a very narrow brief. I would say someone like Anand Sachinand has the enjoyment of the public. That may be the kind of person.
The reason I suggest Jeffrey Palmer is because being a Prime Minister and understanding how that thing works is really valuable. And,
You've got to know that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
David, here is a list of things John Key has forgotten over 4 years. Kim.com and the GCSB illegally spying on him, signing off on luxury BMWs, meeting MediaWorks and agreeing to a $43.3 million loan, the Sky City Pokie deal that he personally involved himself in, and the allegation that S&P were going to downgrade us. Should someone with such a faulty memory be the Prime Minister?
Yeah, well, like I said at the start, you know, this is a man who is celebrated for his encyclopedic knowledge and his excellent recall. So we are being taken for saps here when he's asking us to imagine that he conveniently can't recall the things that are inconvenient to recall. We know that what he's actually doing is fudging. And if he's fudging, then as a leader, he's doing us a profound disservice.
And I'd put it to you guys that when the Prime Minister says, I was not briefed on the Kim.com surveillance by the GCSB, but I was told. It's a very fine. There's no wiggle room between the two, and I would suggest, like John Armstrong, one of a centrist columnist in the New Zealand Herald this morning, did not mix words relating to told or briefed. He just said he was briefed. And John Key's got a problem explaining that if he gets back from LA in time.
We know that the FBI now, thanks to Scoop, watch the raid live on the GCSB TV feed. Did the GCSB pass any intelligence along to the NSA?
Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Justice Paul Naser, indicated that it did not, that the information was contained in between the GCSB and the New Zealand Police. His approach in investigating this issue is one where he is in charge of the public interest in looking into those things. He's got a reputation of being a credible and open-minded individual.
He is a staff of one.
And yes, he's had the staff of one and a budget of 0.5 full-time equivalent over a year. I would suggest that once again illustrates the need for an independent inquiry of someone outside of the judicial framework, but has that kind of skill beyond. And we do have, as it's said to you before, that I think we have people like Anand Sachinand in this country that enjoys the confidence of the public. This is what it needs.
David, New Zealand spent $74 million on the GCSB last year, and they still couldn't work out after a $500,000 firework display that Kim was a New Zealand resident. Should we get, as taxpayers, should we get a refund?
Yeah, well, clearly, because it was so abundantly clear that the .com was known and known to everybody, the argument just doesn't wash. And what that leaves you to conclude is that they are being a little loose with their obligations, and their, I suspect, have been working with stars in their eyes at the notion of the US wanting their help with what is essentially a civil matter that has been criminalised in America, and it's actually an economic turf, a business turf war. Where in fact people like Kim.com are transforming business in a way that may actually be for the greater good in the longer run.
Sure.
Now, all of that means that their own direction has been kind of muddied, because when you start to step into somebody's business transaction, you're completely forgetting that you're actually supposed to be acting in the interests of the state.
That's right.
And excuse me. the larger picture here, and possibly the one that doesn't actually hurt this government, but is nonetheless the most perturbing, is that civil liberties really matter. And when civil liberties are potentially undermined by agencies that think they know better than the law, you're in trouble. Not maybe today, but in the longer run, because that has a corrosive effect.
And civil liberties is obviously an important aspect. And when you've got a tough guy politician like Winston Peters saying that as a minister, when the spooks come along with their warrants to surveil somebody, he said a Western-leaning politician or minister takes note and really examines that to make sure that the sanctity of it is not eroded.
Right?
You know, that is what's really important here. Those checks and balances. What it also comes down to is once again, this apparent culture around the beehive, particularly led by John Key, where it's okay to be blasé. There's a lot of political mileage to be gained by being relaxed, the kind of guy you'd want at the barbecue. But when it comes down to intelligence and surveillance and security, the public interest, the national interest and international interests, they're not barbecue conversations.
Smile and waves don't cut it.
And the relationship between the state and the citizen.
Final question to both of you on this. Do either one of you honestly believe that no one from Hollywood will talk about the .com case with John Key while he's over there?
Let's turn it on its head. Will any of them not? You know?
And the other thing is, how can John Key give that assurance before their meetings that no one's going to ask it? Has he scripted their replies? You know,
we already have the
is it
answers
David
written.
Letterman he's going to in New York as opposed to LA?
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2. If you thought the GCSB fiasco was incompetent, look at how the government have handled education. The botched announcement of Christchurch school closures, the bizarre colour-coded principals episode, the facts as revealed by John Campbell that the information used to close their schools is flawed, and now Hekia Parata's claim that the biggest issues confronting young Māori and Pacifica kids is that teachers can't pronounce their names. David, is there anything that Hekia Parata can touch in education that doesn't explode into a fireball?
I'm astonished by how this has happened, because she, I thought, was set for a pretty impressive ministerial career. But I think it's her high-handedness that is undoing her. She's there is a degree of haughtiness and self-belief that can trip her up, and I think that's what's happening here. I think she needs to have given a little more thought and consideration to some of these things before she's pulled the trigger on them.
Is the main problem for children not performing that the teachers can't pronounce their names properly?
No, of course not.
I mean, there is
I don't know if that was actually in the script of the speech yesterday. I suspect it struck me as more like something that just suddenly occurred to her and she threw it in.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it had all that kind of feel about it.
How acceptable to the people of Christchurch, Selwyn, is it to have their schools closed by the Ministry of Education using flawed data?
Oh no, it's an insult. It's an insult to all of us watching this and the outrage that comes with that. But when you're actually impacted on that, you know, we know that at the centre of every community in this country is a school. The school is often the nucleus of that community. And to have some high-minded official from Wellington telling them on false data or misconstrued data that they're going to be closed is something that speaks right to the inhumanity of some of these decisions. The consultation is one where it should take place at the beginning of such things being thrown about in the public arena sometimes. In this case, I believe that the people in Christchurch deserve the dignity of being able to get around the table with these people and go through those kind of things, iron out the problems relating to the accuracy of it, and then see what they had and to deal with it.
Shouldn't the Ministry of Education have got that right from the beginning?
And the minister should be in charge of this. What we're seeing here, I think, is a politician who, like David said, was being touted only months ago as being a potential Prime Minister of the future. Now, what we've seen is a minister who, under the public glare, as opposed to gaze, is crumbling, is going into a defensive pattern. You see it time and time again when a minister cannot adjust to ministerial politics as opposed to general politics, that they put a fortified ring around themselves and they make outrageous claims to try and justify their position that they've taken. And with Hekia Parata, this is exactly what we're seeing.
David, how have they gotten this so wrong?
Well, I suspect part of what's pushing this is the the same pressure on all of the government departments, and that is there's not enough money. So suddenly you see this possibility of reconfiguring in Christchurch and taking some pressure off your overall budget problems, and away you go. And I see that as more likely than some of the other interpretations that say, for example, if you close a whole lot of schools, that means that you've got actually viable premises left there that can be then reopened for charter schools. I can see the argument, but I do think it's a little more fanciful. I think it's plain and simple budget pressure that's pushing this, and the rest of it is insufficient attention to detail.
Yes.
It's just astonishing that the building counts are wrong. They're working on the assumption that the population has gone, but everything we know about what's happening in Christchurch tells us that's a low point, and it will rise again. Maybe not to the levels it was, but you should not be working on the assumption that these are the actual population numbers.
Two things stood out to me this week relating to this whole issue. We saw Jerry Brownlee talking about the Rena affair.
Yes.
For the first time ever, I thought Jerry Brownlee was looking like he was hesitant, stuttering, and was trying to get his message across. It's very uncharacteristic of a very bombastic and clear communicator.
Very good.
We saw Hiki Parata's staggering attempt yesterday to reclaim some sort of authority over her ministry, and we saw John Key looking like he was absolutely whacked after 2 weeks of scrutiny. I feel that there is a lot of there was a piece in the New Zealand Herald today that alluded to a view that John Key's management of his own ministers is starting to be exposed. And that ministers like Hiki Parata go off message with policy that is huge in their respective portfolios, only to be turned around by the Prime Minister at a later date. That suggests that the decisions were not born within Cabinet. So if that is a true argument, then we've got real problems in New Zealand. We've got almost a situation where the country needs to have a relook at its governance from the beehive. If the country gets to a stage where it feels we have no confidence in the way the Prime Minister is handling this, surely the National Party is honour bound to actually re-examine the leadership that it is elected there.
Question to both of you. Mike Williams and Fran O'Sullivan commented on Q&A last weekend that this bungled Christchurch school closure is the sort of thing that costs governments at election time. Do you think it's that bad?
Oh, you bet, yeah, because a thing like schools affects so many people, parents and grandparents and whole communities.
Swinging
swinging voters. And like Selwyn said, a school really is the focus of the community, especially in a time like this when some of the halls and churches have gone. And Christchurch is, as they've been saying in this controversy, a collection of villages, and they cluster in that way. So you're upsetting a hell of a lot of people. And bear in mind that last election, one of the most striking movements was of Christchurch to national.
That's right.
Well, I don't think you're going to get it this next time.
You think any of those 800,000 enrolled voters that didn't vote in the last election, they're upset and angry they didn't vote now?
There needs to be a huge mobilisation politically for those that felt disenfranchised from the New Zealand vote. That they would not make a difference. It's the challenge to the opposition parties to actually test where their representation lies. We know from what we can see in the last month that National is losing its focus on who and what it represents. It certainly does not appear to be representing the average Kiwi joker and her family.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3. How are the media and the Sensible Sentencing Trust going to hype up Beast of Blenheim type crime stories and fear if the crime rates are actually dropping? Selwyn, why are we spending $1 billion on a new private prison when crime stats are actually going down?
There's two things here. One, ideology is driven, the move to private prisons. There's no other answer to that part. The other thing is these are long-term type of decisions that get, lead to the building of. And these decisions were made at a time, obviously, where the National Party was trying to talk up the need for this type of thing. Is there a fiscal waste around that? that's a question, and one would argue yes. But the other thing is the crime stats themselves. Now we know that there are significant high volume proportions in the crime statistics that have now been excluded from those statistics.
Domestic violence.
So you know that speaks to the fact of the questions of, are crime trends going down? Is it significant in the sense that we're seeing a kind of community here? Two ways people could kind of go with that one. One would be, okay, the numbers might be down in particular areas, but the severity of the crimes is a concerning worry. The other thing is we haven't been able to deal with our methamphetamine problems that fuels a lot of the awfulness in our communities. And you know, the other thing is the fiscal waste of embarking on long-term private type of arrangements in corrections areas. When it's a community issue, it isn't one that should be profited from.
A 70% jump in drug crime. Are we all of a sudden a nation of druggies?
Yeah, well, part of the answer to that is that how you work with the stats gives you whatever answer you're looking for, especially with something as sprawling as crime and with such a big and deep and rich database. But Selwyn's right too. You know, the methamphetamine problem runs deep and wide, and that will certainly be influencing some of that. I don't know. I think the backdrop to all of this discussion is the one you touched on at the start, which is spending so much on prisons. You know, our approach to crime and trying to rehabilitate people is just so primitive. And for as long as we remain stuck in that state, the way crime happens here is probably not going to change that much.
You know, do you think that the reason why we've had a sudden jump in the drug statistics and the amount of people the police are arresting has more to do with the fact that they've lowered the evidential threshold to seize people's assets, right? It used to be beyond reasonable doubt. They've reduced that to balance of probabilities, which is just a civil case, much more sort of. So it's much easier to seize people's assets, which then in turn becomes a revenue source for the police. So they've actually got a vested interest, don't they, to go after and find as many drug dealers as they can.
Not sure about that part, because I think that just goes into the consolidated fund, like the traffic fine.
Yeah.
So I don't think that applies. But the larger question about how those conventions are secured is certainly true.
Right.
You whenever you drop the evidential barrier, you'll get more
Much
people
easier
getting
to
locked up.
Relating to the operational aspects that you were talking there, you know, I remember when I was involved with the Labour Alliance government when it first came in, there was a lot of targeted funding relating to developing a highway patrol and also for burglaries to be turned around within a 24-hour period. So there was targeted funding and clear directives from the government to get those results. The police reluctantly on both counts adjusted and started to return improvements. It may be that the ministers in the national government have said, look at this area, but don't look at that area, for example, and are proportioning their focus on operations in that respect. So it's David, once again, I thought you're right on the button there about it's how you use these statistics for your political gain. And what we can see here is two messages coming out of the National Party. Are they saying that they're winning the war on crime, or are they saying that, you know, the police have basically just done it a little bit better? That doesn't necessarily mean the same thing.
And it did seem that the largest reason why you had a sudden drop in those crime stats was because the Christchurch CBD no longer exists, and that generates a lot of the crime, doesn't it? We saw a jump in crime central Auckland, didn't we? Final question to both of you on this. By 2014, New Zealand will have the highest proportion of prisoners in private prisons than any other country in the world. How has that been allowed to happen with just zero public consultation? Yeah,
it's astonishing. I've never quite understood why the National Party were just so excited ideologically about the idea of a private prison. You know, if you could demonstrate that it in some way has a superior outcome in rehabilitation, I'd be interested. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence of that.
Well, one of the interesting things I thought with Nigel Latter's work in Beyond the Darklands with his latest series is he seems to be exploring another way which has an element of humanising aspects of corrections, and trying to find a way that's rehabilitative in a satisfactory kind of method. That's a fascinating thing compared to what he was presenting in his program perhaps a couple of years ago, where it was much more, these people are monsters, etc., etc. One wonders whether or not, at the end of the day, that thinking will once again filter into the policies in our government. One would imagine, though, it's going to take a monumental shift relating to who is actually being representing here.
7% of American prisoners in private prisons. By 2014, it will be 20% in New Zealand. That's an astonishing figure, isn't it?
And it's disturbing, and it's an abhorrence considering the ethnicities of that as well.
Yeah, that's right. Let's wrap the show with final word this week. Selwyn, your final word.
Well, I do think that at the end of the day, there does need to be, as we've been arguing at the beginning of this program, an independent inquiry into this whole investigation, surveillance of .com and his people. The public interest must be observed here, and it must be satisfied. And we're not saying it from a haughty, high, mighty kind of position. It is one important factor, and it must be resolved in that way.
David, your final word this week is?
Well, I've been grabbing every bully pulpit I can to champion my cause, which is the bird and the Bird of the Forest and Bird Society Bird of the Year contest. I'm asking that everybody vote for the kokako. Listen to this.
Beautiful.
Not just a final word, but a final bird. And I don't know if we can run this across the bottom, but if we can, facebook.com/mybirdvote. Everybody, please go to facebook.com/mybirdvote and vote for this beautiful, hauntingly beautiful, ethereal beauty, the kokako.
Why do you love that bird so much, David?
I saw it. I went to Tiritiri Matangi a few years ago and saw it for the first time ever, and I'd never seen anything like it. Look, it's got that Lone Ranger mask that looks like some sort of jet airplane from the 50s. Also, this is the colour of the dress my wife was wearing the day I met her.
Oh, you're really going to the vote.
Yeah,
you are just... And what has Reverend Khan got? A hawk. It's nothing.
Some hawk.
It's nothing. Who
Some
cares?
hawk.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Selwyn. Ladies and gentlemen, my final word. It seems the BNZ spin doctors in advert land sense the rising disgust by many at their industry's despicable greed and role in creating the global financial crisis. They ascertain that we are asking existential questions about money as the consumer culture collapses. So while BNZ asks us if money is good or bad, they have increased their profits up 37% to $528 million. If I was walking away with $500 million during one of the steepest recessions with 270,000 children in poverty and the highest inequality rates ever, I'd be wanting to ask pointless bullshit questions that don't go anywhere as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the 1% don't care if the 99% think money is good or bad. They just want you distracted so you don't notice them taking yours. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.